I'm gonna lose my camera at some point during this shoot. Okay guys, crappy tripods aside, what is up? Coach Matt here. So I've got something a little bit different for you guys today. I've recently got a new client here at the den. His name is Colten. And he's actually soon to be a Division I pitcher for Duke University. And I thought it'd be cool to kind of show you guys the differences in strength and conditioning programs for an athlete versus, a traditional strength trainee who all they're doing is the strength training and they don't have a sport outside of it. And hopefully this will help out you athletes out there who might have a strength and conditioning coach for yourself and your programming is kind of on your own and you're wondering what to do. Or for you future coaches out there, maybe you're wondering how you should go about training your athletes or future athletes, and hopefully this video will help you guys out. Now, Colten is a baseball pitcher, so we will kind of be doing this through the lens of baseball and pitching specifically, but the overall theme should kind of carry over to each sport, and there'll just be some minor changes with maybe how training is designed. I'll also be rolling some of our most recent training footage over top of things, so you can kind of get a feel for how things might look on a day-to-day basis. So training an athlete, first and foremost, your goal is to make sure you have minimized their injury risk to an absolute minimum. Focus on making sure your programming minimizes injury risk for their given sport, and then worry about performance enhancing. All of your training for the athlete and all of their time in practice is gonna be for nothing if they don't even make it through mid-season. In Colten's case, this is a little bit more difficult because I would say making sure a pitcher doesn't get injured is on the coach. So adhering to pitch count rules and adhering to making sure the pitcher has enough rest in between the games that they are throwing in is really going to help save their arm. That whipping motion for the pitch is just so violent. There's not a whole bunch of ways to kind of prevent injury if they're overusing it. That being said, however, there are some ways I can kind of help him out. So if we strengthen up his back, stabilize his shoulder, give him stronger rotational power for his trunk, and give him some bigger, stronger legs, he's going to have more tools at his disposal to throw hard, but not just rely on that whipping motion. Another good example here that's not baseball related would be female athletes, maybe a female soccer player. Females are predisposed to ACL tears, so training up the hamstrings, the glutes, and the hips to kind of stabilize everything will help with minimizing risk for ACL tears. They're also predisposed to being more dominant in their quads, so you don't have to worry about that as much. Okay, so the next big difference between your athlete and your regular strength trainee, and I think a lot of people would think about this first, would be the on-season and off-season. For an athlete, you can't just be training all the time. You are going to have to kind of oscillate the training and make sure you know when they have games, when they have important games, when their season starts, when their season ends. All that sort of information is going to be important to how you program for them. You're going to want to be getting the bulk of their training in during the off season for obvious reasons. They're not going to have any games to worry about. Practices might not be happening at all, or if they are happening, they are lighter or less frequent. And you just won't have to have any other variables in the air. It'll just be your training and your training alone that is affecting them, and you don't have to worry about that affecting them in a game. As it happens, Colten's off-season is quickly approaching. He does have a few games left though, so we haven't done anything too crazy, just some general strength ranges at moderate intensity to kind of get him used to form and technique and just make things look solid before we get into a longer program once he hits his off-season. Once he's all wrapped up and doesn't have to worry about being fresh for pitching, that's when we can run, a traditional strength program. We can progress up in weights and intensity, and again, we don't have to worry about it affecting his game. Now, what do you do when your athlete is in their on-season? So there are a few approaches here. In general, you're just shooting for maintenance, making sure their form and technique is on point, and the intensity is going to be moderate to light depending on kind of where they are in the season. I say this is, dependent because some teams might want to push training through mid-season and prepare themselves for a final game, or maybe want to pull back a bit earlier in the season and keep themselves nice and healthy for the long run. So kind of how you're maintaining or maybe tapering off will change team to team, athlete to athlete. I can't give you an exact roadmap for that. Now, how does this compare to a regular strength training? I know you might be saying, powerlifters and bodybuilders both have on seasons and off seasons, and this is completely true. The difference I would say is even though the powerlifter and the bodybuilder do have an off season, they can still progress in that off season. They might be doing training that's completely different from what they're usually doing. Powerlifter might hit some hypertrophy training, the bodybuilder might hit some strength training, for example, or just completely do a pivot block and completely changing training. But they're still making progress. They're not really hitting like a maintenance phase or a taper down phase. That's really the only difference. The athletes is gonna be, you know, an off-season progression, hit the kind of mid to or early season, maintain, and maybe taper off for a final season, and then that'll just be on loop. All right, and the final thing I want to talk about today is sport specificity. And this is where you might be thinking that a program will be completely different between an athlete and a regular strength trainee, and I'd argue that it's actually not. Sport-specific training has kind of become a flash term in my opinion. First off, it sounds really good to the parents of the athletes and the athletes themselves. And when you have an athlete do something in the gym that directly mimics or looks like something they do in the field, the parent's really impressed with the trainer, the athlete's really impressed with the trainer, and they kind of immediately assume that this is the smartest way to be training. Thing is, sometimes the most sport-specific training doesn't look like the sport at all. Sometimes maybe a squat will be the best thing for your athlete. Sometimes maybe a glute bridge will be the best thing for your athlete. Something that doesn't remotely look like a movement you do on the field. Depending on the athlete, are there going to be, you know, movement patterns and muscle groups that you want to train a bit more or emphasize a bit more? For sure. Do we need to be mimicking absolutely everything this player does on the field? No. Most of the time, we'll be able to kind of progress with those big compound movements a lot quicker and get that raw strength, raw power, raw speed a lot quicker than we will if we're kind of directly mimicking a movement they do on the field. To give you an over-exaggeration of how sport-specific training can be misconstrued, the most sport-specific thing I could do for Colten, the baseball pitcher, is give him a weighted baseball and tell him to go throw it. Unfortunately, that's also probably the fastest way he could injure his arm. Some squats and some shoulder stability though, doesn't look anything like a baseball movement, but being able to push off the mound with stronger legs and then having a nice stable shoulder to throw off, maybe a nice stable back to throw off, that's gonna result in a harder, faster pitch. So don't get caught up in the sport-specific training pit hole where you think it exactly has to mimic a movement on the field. A lot of things that are sport-specific don't look anything like what the player does on the field. All right, guys, I'd say that about covers it for today. That's kind of training your athlete 101. Again, obviously it's not everything and anything to do with training an athlete. So while that isn't everything and anything to know about training an athlete, I would say these are your big objectives for training an athlete. So first and foremost, making sure you minimize that injury risk as much as you can. In terms of how you're programming for them, again, you will be doing most of your progress in the off season. When those early and mid-season kind of rolls around, it will be more of a maintenance phase. And then as those big games, those finals and championships come up, maybe a taper off. So that's kind of how your programming is going to work. It's not just going to be a straight line of progress. And finally, don't get caught up by the term sport-specific training. A lot of sport-specific training does not look like the sport at all, but will still immensely improve your athlete's game. And that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks to Colten for being a sport and letting me get some training footage. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and hope to see you guys all in the next video. Thanks so much, guys.